Okay, improvising bass lines over a chord progression. Name a bigger, more important topic. I am super excited. So this is the first video in a series or course on this topic. Let's talk about what we're trying to do here. So for me, I imagine that this course is for anybody who has encountered this specific situation. I remember a period of time where I was spending a lot of time practicing and playing, and I was like learning a lot of songs, some by ear, actually all by ear. And I was like practicing scales and, doing all that stuff that you hear you're supposed to work on. And yet I had this persistent awareness that when I would meet up with a friend, like a guitar player, and they would just kind of start playing, I couldn't really do anything other than find the root, maybe play the fifth of each chord. And I became aware that there was this big divide between the effort I was putting into this instrument and some of what I knew on paper, the theory that I had, at least intellectually, and what actually came out when I tried to play. So what I'm going to show you is a series of exercises, but more so kind of a methodology and a mindset that got me to a point where I can actually, that same friend sits down and starts playing some chords. Not only can I play more than just root and fifth, I can improvise pretty freely and pretty comfortable. And as bass players, we want to be able to do that, sure, as like soloists. If we want to, rip a lead, cool, more power to you. But we also really want to make sure that we can play functional, solid support on this instrument, not just being stuck on the root, but being able to add a little bit of color very intentionally, very tastefully here and there. So this is going to help you to get to that point. Now, this is an intermediate course. This is not for people who are just starting out. Let me run through a few prerequisite kind of questions. This is going to be a good assessment of whether you're in the right place or whether you should take a step back and come to this later. Here's a few questions. What is the third of a D flat major chord? It's an F. What is the fifth of a B flat minor chord? It's also an F. If we're in the key of A, what's our four chord? D minor. If I'm playing the sixth chord, let's say I'm playing an E minor in the key of G, what is the sixth scale degree over that E minor chord, the sixth minor chord? It's going to be a C. If those questions were very challenging, very new, or you just have no idea what I'm talking about, totally cool. But take a step back. This won't make sense. So watch some other videos, check out some of my channel, check out some of the other awesome teachers out there. Learn a bit about chord scale theory, number theory, learn about how chords are built, how progressions happen in a key, and then come back to this. This is going to be here. The last thing you would want to do if you're trying to learn how to improvise is get too far in the deep end of the pool, get discouraged, feel bad about where you're at, and just walk away from the instrument altogether. So set yourself up for success by making sure that you're in the right place here with this one. But for those of you who are at that intermediate level and have some good functional music theory knowledge, this is going to be super helpful. Now, a couple things about this course. This is not a technical course at all. This is not really about how to move as fluidly on this instrument as possible. In fact, a lot of these exercises are kind of clunky and rote and do not in any way emphasize best technical practices on the instrument. So this is not to get your hands in shape. This is also not going to be extremely academic, like classical theory, where we're thinking a lot about the names of the notes. Hopefully you already kind of have that. This is really going to be assuming that you already understand the notes in a chord, that you already know all the notes on your fretboard, that you already know. If I'm in C, I've got C, E, G. If I'm in D, I've got D, F sharp, A. And we're actually really not going to talk about that a lot because this is ultimately ear training. We're trying to connect your ear and your hands here. And believe it or not, your brain kind of isn't as big a part of that, or at least the information needs to be as deeply digested as it can so that you don't have to think about the names of the notes. Now, we are going to do everything in this course over backing tracks. That is so important. You've probably seen this in my other videos, but as far as ear training goes, nothing productive happens if there is not a chord in the background to compare the note you're playing to. So if you're new to backing tracks, there are a million of them out there for free. There are also some you can pay for. You can make your own backing tracks in GarageBand. This is just something I made in GarageBand. There's also an app I sometimes use when I'm practicing. It's called Progression. I don't have any affiliation with them. It's just a good app. It might be a couple dollars. It might be free. I'm not sure. But you can set the tempo, grab a drum groove, plug in a chord progression, and it'll just loop it for you to practice over. It's a really cool app. Your backing tracks do not need to be fancy. In fact, I think the simpler the better, because all we want to hear is the sound of a triad or the sound of whatever chords we're working on. I'm going to give us a backing track for this video in the key of G major. So everything we do today is going to be in that key over this specific progression. The progression is C major, our 4 chord, G major, our 1 chord, D major, our 5 chord, E minor, our 6 chord. 4, 1, 5, 6, over and over. And yeah, it doesn't start on the 1 chord, which is always a little bit more interesting and something that's happening a lot recently in pop music. So we're going to do everything over this track. Now, we're going to start with some simple exercises that are going to be a little bit more rote, more like drills, a little bit more mechanical, a little more boring. But these are actually super important. And then later we're going to get into some improv all within this lesson. In this first video today, we're just going to focus on chord tones. We've got 4 triads in this progression. We're going to play with our root, our third, and our fifth on all of them. And the goal here is that after you sit with this material for a couple weeks, you'll really have a sense, not just of what is the third of a C major. I know in my head it's an E, but I have no idea what that sounds like. Rather that you'll have a sense of what each note in a chord sounds like. This is going to be great for bass playing. This is going to be great for anyone who's interested in writing melodies. This is going to be great if you are wanting to solo. Useful for so many skills. So we're going to play with just the root, third, and the fifth. And these initial exercises, again, a little bit more foundational. This is a chance to check that you really do know what you think you know. I know sometimes that's the hard part. And also just to further solidify it. What we're going to do, we're going to take this progression. We're going to run our arpeggios and inversions. We're going to do ascending and descending, and we're going to do that through this chord progression. So I'm going to start with root position triads, root, third, fifth, ascending. We're going to go through this progression. Let me just show you what it sounds like. Actually, a quick note before we do it. When we descend through this, we are going to be starting on the fifth of the chord. Now, here's where this gets valuable. And even though you might already know these shapes, this is where you're going to get some value by really focusing on listening. When we play up the ascending root position triad, if we focus on the first note that we hear, we're hearing the root. That's probably a sound most of us are more familiar with because that's what bass players usually play. Now we're going to descend though, so we're going to start on the fifth and go fifth, third, root. Really listen to the sound of that first note, getting the sound in your ear. sounds really different, doesn't it? It's actually got such a nice quality to it, the fifth over the chord. Obviously, we have the option to play the fifth over any chord. We can start a measure that way and really kind of make it an inversion, or we can focus on that sound in a fill or a riff. The more you get that sound in your ear, the more you're really going to start to have control over the sound of what comes out of your instrument. Let's keep going. So we've done root position. Let's do first inversion. We're going to start ascending. So we are going to go up from the third, fifth root. Here we go. Let's descend. Now we're going to be starting on the root and descending through a first inversion. So root, fifth, third. Here we go. This is not a technical exercise, and in fact, when I do this, I give myself permission to really just focus on the sound. But if you want to get a little bit extra out of this, sometimes it can be nice to practice playing all this in a specific area of the fretboard. Me, I love playing my bass up here, like 7th, 9th fret. So recently I've been trying to make myself do some of these exercises down closer to root position. It's not where I'm most comfortable, but this is a good chance to help myself get more comfortable down there. So it might be something to try out. Now let's go ahead, round this out. We'll do second inversion, ascending, so starting on the fifth. What's left? You know what's left. Descending through second inversion. So we are going to be starting on the third root, fifth. Really getting that sound of the third in your ear here. Now, when I practice this, I do each one a couple times. I know that I'm ready to move on from each one, like root position ascending. I do it until I really feel, being honest with myself, of course, like I know what that sounds like right now, where I can hum, either out loud or at least in my head, hum the note before it happens. When I got that, okay, I'm ready to move on. I'll try descending. I'll go to first inversion, second. When you're new to this, that might be a while. This exercise, if you're new to it, it really might take some time, and you might want to give it some time. There might be a lot of value to be had from that. If this is more reinforcement for you of something that you're already quite familiar with, not just intellectually, but in your ears, maybe you don't need to spend much time on this exercise. On average, if you're trying to pin me down, I'd say maybe spend a third of your time practicing this material for this video on those exercises, and then get into the more improvisational stuff. So let's go there. The improv. Here's the thing I'll say first. If we want to learn how to improvise, we have to just start doing some improvisation. It's kind of like swimming. I can read every book that's ever been written about how to swim, and until I get in the pool, I'm not really going to know how to swim. And a lot of people get stuck trying to do exercises and hope that one day they're just going to be able to pick up their instrument and improvise ideas effectively. Exercises are great, but if we want to be able to improvise, we've got to just start improvising. So here's a simple way to do that. This first practice, we're going to take what we just did. We've got this progression. We've got our roots, our thirds, and our fifths. And I want you to play through mixing and matching those different inversions, ascending, descending, and adding some rhythmic variety. You don't have to play every note on every chord, or you can. You can take it up multiple octaves if you want. We're just going to practice adding some interest, trying to make this sound a little more like music. You get the idea. Now, at first, you might kind of just be moving your fingers. At first, you might be, as you're doing this, almost guessing. I guess I'll play an E over the C major, and I guess I'll kind of descend down and see what my fingers do. Now I guess I'll try to play the D over the G, and maybe I'll ascend up from there. At first, it might feel like you are very disconnected from what sound is going to come out, and that's cool. We're going to have to start there, but if you practice this, and most importantly, if you really listen, maybe spending some time hanging out on just a note or two to really get the sound in your ear, you will do just that, and you'll start to get to a point where more and more often, before you even move your finger, you think, I bet it might sound like this, and lo and behold, you're right. Now, let's keep looking at some other options here. These are kind of like improv games. I don't even really like to use the word exercises for this because I think exercise draws up this image of like, I do a repetitive thing one way over and over, and that's inherently not improvising. So these are more like games that you can play. The game we just played, there were rules. The rules were you can only play the root, third, and fifth. You have to add some rhythmic variety, and you're not playing one thing over and over again. A simple game, but a good improv game to get you building some of this stuff. Let's look at a different set of rules. This time, I want you to think about aiming for a specific chord tone on each chord. So I'll demo this and I'll say I'm going to start on the third each time. And then from there, I can kind of do whatever I hear, or if I don't hear anything yet, I can just try playing some of the notes, but I'm going to start on the third. You can do the same thing, of course, with the fifth. You can mix and match third and then fifth, third and then fifth, but we'll just do third. Here we go. The idea. Again, you can focus on the third, you can focus on the fifth, the root. We don't want to forget the root, right? And then you can mix and match. A lot of composition actually kind of uses this idea, at least in an organic way. Often if a composer, let's say on a jazz piece, has emphasized the third of a chord in the melody over a progression, the next chord, they're probably going to get away from the sound of the third, and maybe they'll go to the fifth or the root or the seventh or ninth, but it's almost like this rotation. All right, third of this chord, now fifth of that chord, now seventh. You can start to do that with this. Now let's look at another way to play a game with this, another improv game. So this time we're going to play an idea. You can kind of let whatever comes out come out. And then we're going to try to transpose that idea over each chord. So it's like a motif that we're going to play over each of the 4 chords. Now here, we haven't said this yet, but you'll notice things sound a little different over the minor chord compared to over the major chords. And that's cool. That's actually a really helpful thing later on when we're trying to write interesting lines. But we're taking one motif and we are improvising over the progression. On and on, you get the idea. That one's especially valuable because you're hearing relative pitches transposed through these different chords. You're hearing it in C, then in the G, then in the D. We're not exactly changing key, but we're kind of are changing context. So that especially is going to help to cement in, oh, okay, the third sounds like this. You're hearing the third 4 times over 4 different chords. It's like you're getting reps in that way. Now, another improv game we can play. This is more of like a voice leading thing or a pedal point thing. And if those terms are new, voice leading is just this really important concept in classical music theory. When we're talking about harmony, the basic idea is it often sounds smoother if you have chords where there are multiple notes happening at once. It often sounds smoother moving between chords if each note can go to a nearby note rather than jump to something far away. Now, as bass players, we don't always have to follow this rule. The bass line, the lowest instrument in a group, actually has a little bit of freedom to jump more. It doesn't sound necessarily off. In fact, it can sound great if the bass jumps up a fifth or a sixth or an octave or whatever it is. But voice leading is a really important part of harmony, and we can come up with some really cool lines, especially kind of melodic things if we start to use this. Now for this one, because we're trying to hear how one note becomes the next note on the next chord, I'd recommend maybe just picking like 1 note per chord, not playing too many notes, really hearing the change. Let me demo a little bit. The idea. So in case I didn't say that clearly enough, on each note, I'm trying to find the closest nearby note that's in the next chord and go to that. It's kind of like a gold star if you can find something that's a half step away or a whole step away. That's not always possible, but you're trying to find something that's very near to the note you're on rather than jumping to something far away. Now, this last improv game, this one is especially unstructured, but it's probably the most important one. For this one, I want you to only play an idea once you have heard something in your mind and then try to have that come out on the instrument. All these things we've done so far, you could probably kind of think your way through it. Move your fingers to the notes that you know are the root, the third, and the fifth. Follow these rules in kind of an academic way. And that's actually okay. That is going to help to get the sound in your ear. But now we're really, for the first time, putting the horse in front of the cart here, and you're going to wait until you hear something and then try to execute it. When you're first doing this, your success rate might be a little low. More often than not, maybe the idea isn't going to come out exactly as you hear it. It's okay. Just keep practicing it. Give it time. Think about simple ideas. Try 2-note ideas. Really simple stuff. You can always add more later. You can get busier, but we can start simple. That can give you a better chance of success with this stuff. And also it's going to help you to learn faster anyway. Now, the thing here, nobody is going to know other than you if you have successfully played the idea in your head. I mean, maybe if you hit like a really wrong note, they're going to know something's off. But the cool thing about this, playing with these chord tones, whatever you play is probably going to sound fine. We're just trying to dial it in to where you're actually executing what you've heard. So I'm going to demo this. Now, you aren't going to know if I get exactly the sound I heard up here. And just like if I was listening to you do this, I wouldn't know. But I'm going to demo it. And what I'm emphasizing here is that I'm only going to play something once I've heard it in my head. Let's just jump in. 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. So more or less all of that was what I was hearing. If you want to test this in another way, you could sing while you play. Now, that does involve some multitasking, so that actually might end up throwing you off, but it's a great way to check, am I actually hearing these notes before the instrument produces a sound? So let's start to recap here. This first lesson, we're just looking at chord tones. Later videos, we're going to get to other stuff. Today, we're looking at chord tones. We've got a progression in G major, 4, 1, 5, 6. We've got a backing track. Again, I can't emphasize enough how essential that is. You really won't get anywhere with ear training if you're not hearing a chord behind the note that you're playing. So we've got a backing track, and we initially did some more mechanical exercises to make sure that we really know our arpeggios and inversions. We played root position, first inversion, second inversion, ascending and descending over the progression. I recommend spending about a third of your practice time on that, spending the other 2/3 excuse me, on these improv games. And so the improv games that we looked at, first, we looked at just taking the chord tones and messing around with the rhythm, trying out different rhythmic ideas. Then we looked at aiming for a specific chord tone on each chord. Like I'm going to play the third each time, or the fifth, or I can start anywhere, but I'm going to end on the root. Then we looked at transposing motifs. So I play an idea over the first chord, and then I try to play that same idea relative to each of the other chords. Then we looked at voice leading / pedal points, where I'm trying to get to the closest next note I can. If my first note is an E and I know I'm going to a G, okay, I can go to D. That's just a half step down. And lastly, maybe the most important one, also the one that can be the most frustrating, so be patient with yourself. Only playing an idea when you have first heard it in your head. So instead of moving my fingers, sound is produced, and now I know what it sounds like up here, flipping that around. I wait until I hear an idea, then I move my fingers, sound is produced here, and hopefully it's the same sound. So spend maybe a week or two with this stuff. How long it's going to take is just going to depend on where you're coming in at. For those of you who a lot of this stuff is maybe more review or things that you've spent some time with, you might get pretty far with this in a week. You might be ready for the next video pretty soon. For those of you who are really stretching yourself by being here, you might need 3 or 4 weeks with this material, and that's cool. Here's what I would say. Stay with this as long as it's continuing to be challenging, as long as you continue to feel like you are getting something out of it, where every couple days at least you feel like you're getting a little better, and follow those 2 things. If you get terribly, terribly bored of this after a couple weeks, maybe move on. You can always come back to it. We're not built to do one thing endlessly over and over. But try to be patient. Try to give this some time to really soak in before we start to add more in. Now, next time in this next video in this series, we are going to start looking at non-chord tones. We're probably going to focus initially on the 9th, the 6th, and we might look at combining some of this stuff in some different ways. So that's where we're going to go next time. But for now, take a beat, practice this stuff a bit, have fun with it, enjoy it. It's a really exciting thing when you get to the point where you can honestly say you are playing on here what's happening in your head rather than just memorizing things. This is going to get you there. Trust this roadmap. Just give it some time. Be patient with yourself. Enjoy the process, and I'll see you next time.